Hare Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today is Bhakti Wednesday. And so, after finishing the eight-week-long series that we did on the Sri Shikshastakam called Even God Likes to Pray, which if you haven't watched that yet, check it out. I think you guys will like that series on a special prayer from the Bhakti tradition. But today we're taking a Q&A. We haven't taken a question. We haven't done a Q&A episode for a while or taken some of your questions. I have some of them in queue. If you ever have any questions about Bhakti Yoga, philosophy of Bhakti, broadly speaking, devotional love of the divine as a way of life, you can always email if you have any questions you want me to cover in an episode, info@nightlightastrology.com. Put Bhakti Q&A in the subject line. Well, the question today is a really good one. It's one that I get often, but feel that it would be a good one to make a video on. And that is the question, what do I do if I'm cultivating a spiritual life and my partner or my spouse is at best just not into it and at worst vehemently opposed to it? So we're going to start by just imagining that the question is being asked from the standpoint of being in a relationship with someone who's just not interested. They're just not into it. At the end, I'll say a few things about what to do or how to think about being in a relationship with someone that's vehemently opposed to your spiritual lifestyle or practices or what have you. But first, what I want to say about this is that I get this question more than you could possibly imagine. In somewhere between the 10 and 15,000 chart mark in my practice right now, I would say that probably 4,000 or 5,000 charts, if I had to guess, were spent talking to people about really struggling in a relationship because either a person does not share their spiritual life or practice with a partner, or they even are with someone who really thinks it's childish or stupid or ignorant or really doesn't respect it, or that there's real divide because of it. Usually it's just so and so isn't into it, but not that they oppose or oppress or something, although I have seen that too. So again, the bulk of today, I'll just offer some thoughts about being with someone who's just not into it or not attracted to it, because I think that's probably more common. So first, I'm going to talk, I prefer giving advice from my experience in counseling people based on what works, what's proactive, what can you do. But I think with this topic, I want to start with 3 things to avoid. First of all, your spiritual life is something that it's very natural when you are growing spiritually, having spiritual insights, realizations. There's a sort of cleansing and healing process that's happening through a spiritual lifestyle. It's very common to want to share that with other people. It's especially the people you love, especially the people that you're close to, family, friends, lovers. Probably the first people that you would want to share what's growing and blossoming, in the gardens of your heart. So those are the people you want to share with. It's really hurtful and it's painful. And just to start off, just saying that it is often part of the cross we bear in spiritual life to not be able to share that deep spiritual understanding or process with everyone. So I think it's first of all just understanding that in an ideal world, we would share our spiritual depths intimately in confidence with the people we love the most, friends and family especially, and lovers. But the truth is that most of the time we are very lucky in this lifetime if we have even just a few close friends that we share our spiritual depths with. We're very fortunate if we have even just a few. And this is something that there's famous texts like the Nectar of Instruction, which I've read from before. Actually, we've done a whole series on that text. And it talks about, it's important to have a few people that you can speak to in confidence and share your heart and soul with. So you want spiritual friendship in your life. You need spiritual companions. If you don't have any, sometimes, first of all, it's really painful. And for many of us, we don't have many, if any at all. So that's a truth in life, because all mystical practices around the world tell us that, there's many are, there's very few of us out there, in other words. So I don't want to make it sound like we're elitists or something, but not everyone is following that call to develop their inner life, to grow and change and evolve as a person, as a soul. Not everyone even believes in the existence of a soul, or that such activities are worthwhile, whatever a person may believe about the soul or God or anything. So, first of all, it's rare, and we should all know that and kind of come to accept that. But it also we can place an enormous amount of pressure on the most intimate person in our life, partner or spouse, to fill that hole in our hearts for spiritual companionship if we also don't have any outside of our primary, if we have a primary relationship. If we don't have any spiritual friendships or allies or friends or community outside of that bond, we can place all the more pressure on it. So one quick answer is, you know, find those spiritual bonds and connections where you can and develop those relationships, because that will take off some of the burden for your family members to carry it, or your spouse or partner to carry all of it. And sometimes that alone can work wonders. And also just remember that it's very normal to actually have not a huge abundance of spiritual friends. We're pretty lucky and fortunate if we have even a couple, in my humble opinion and in my experience. Talking to people, being in lots of different spiritual communities. A lot of people in spiritual community, like the bulk of their life is spent with colleagues and work and family and people who just like aren't interested. So it's not that they're evil or bad or anything, or that we look and say, oh, they're so ignorant, we're so evolved. It's just, it's not something you may share naturally with everyone in your life. And that can feel lonely at times. So it's just part of the path. So the first thing I would say, though, if you're in a relationship and you're like, my spouse or partner just isn't that interested, there's 3 things to avoid. Let's start with those. And I want to say again that sometimes it's hard to avoid these things. So I don't feel like, oh, beat yourself up if you have ever done these things, or if you find it hard to avoid doing these things, right? But it's like these things probably don't help. Number 1 is evangelizing. This is why you ought to believe. This is why you ought to do and be and think the way that I do, or have a spiritual life, or drink whatever Kool-Aid I've drunk. Join whatever church or group or cause, or get into astrology, or whatever it is. It's like it almost never works to try to sell someone spirituality. Try to be like, here, look, your life will be so much better if you just do and think the way that I do. Because what they hear is, people hear condemnation. They hear you're lost, but I can help you get found. They hear superiority. That it's like evangelizing. There is a way to spread the light and love, but usually it's not by trying to convert someone, if that makes sense. So maybe there's a different way of understanding the word evangelize, a more enlightened way to spread that spiritual insight or joy. But usually it's not by trying to convince and convert. So be very careful of that. I think that is one of the surefire ways to deepen existing divisions or incompatibilities or lack of interest. It will tend to amplify and dig people's heels in more, in my experience. So if you want people to, at the very least, respect and appreciate what you're into, it's very important that you give them the space to be themselves, to model acceptance and love of who they are and where they're at, not thinking that, okay, well, something's really wrong with you unless you're, at the evolved place that I'm at, and really meaning it, not just like secretly being like, okay, well, I'm in a better place, but I can't evangelize because it'll push them away, and I need to get them to the light. So can't evangelize because don't even carry the covert mentality that I'm trying to convert them. Just let go of caring one way or another if they find the light, or something like that. Instead, trust that God, the universe, accepts and loves this person just as they are right now, as they are. And so that's my job, is to mirror that same, just like, you're good. I love you. Kind of, it's like, in AA, I think it is, there's a saying like, stay in your own lane. It's a little bit like that. It's like, just do your thing. Let them do theirs. Give space for them to be themselves. Don't carry any sense of superiority. Number 2 would be judging. Oh, well, I've just become a vegetarian because I'm so spiritual, So it's like, oh, what are you, having a turkey sandwich? So, judging is, it comes very close to evangelizing, but it's a little different. It's well, I have some superior, spiritual knowledge, and you don't, so I make comments or remarks trying to enlighten you, and they're very, condemning and judging. So it's the evangelizing, it's the judging. But number three, it's also repressing. The other thing that people often do that you really ought to avoid is to repress, hide. Don't show that you are spiritual or that you have spiritual interests. You don't want to like evangelize, try to convert, think that something's wrong, condemn, judge, be critical, get all frustrated that you're not spiritual and you should be, and why are you sitting in the ignorant muck? Where it's like, okay, that's that. But the opposite thing is also true, which is you don't want to just like hide who you are or hide your spiritual interests or practices or lifestyle or your joy or your happiness or anything like that. So it's like, don't evangelize, don't judge, and just don't repress your spirituality either. And that's a hard, tricky balance to figure out. To me, it's not, there's not a formula for it. It's a day by day process of learning to be non-judging, compassionate, loving, allowing people to be who they are while also being who you are without it carrying the weight of judgment or any kind of like condescension. And that's it's the work of a lifetime, really. For a lot of us, it's like that's the work of learning to be loving, learning to be anchored in our spiritual life and just accepting of where other people are at. That alone, if you do that, is also such an effective way of letting people see what's so beautiful about what it is that you're into, whatever it may be. So, though, on the other hand, there's three things to do, and I think these are more important than they avoid these. There's sort of like prohibitions first. Let's get those out of the way, and then let's talk about what you can do that's actually constructive. The first thing is sort of following on the repression thing. It's just to love what you love. If you like to pray, if you like to meditate, if you like to go on spiritual retreats or pilgrimages, if you like to read certain kinds of material, if you like to stack your bookshelf with crystals, you know what I mean? You like to sit in on certain webinars with certain teachers, you like to read A Course in Miracles, or you like to chant Hare Krishna, or you like to go to, an Easter sunrise church service, like whatever it is in your spiritual path that brings you joy, that connects you more closely to the divine, that helps you cultivate virtue, that makes you smile and feel like you're growing, that keeps you inspired and tuned in. Love what you love without pretension, without, apology, and without any kind of affront to the soul or individuality of others. Just be in what you love. And that is the most positive thing that you could do possibly to, attract some kind of shared path with yourself and a partner, most likely. It's like, for example, when I first got into Bhakti, my wife was not interested. Just not she was like not like averse or hating on it or anything, just wasn't interested. And I was kind of bummed about it, and I asked one of my teachers, like, should I try to bring her to events or like tell her about her what? And they said, teacher said, no, just love what you love. Just do your thing, do your japa, your meditation. It's whatever. She'll see you reading what you read, and maybe she sees change in your attitude or behavior and a gentler spirit over time, coupled with non-judgment toward her. And suddenly it's, hey, I'd like to go to that event with you. And I'll tell you, that is precisely how it happened. Now, my wife and I are unique in that we have often been able to lead or guide each other in interesting and fun directions. Like, I think we're both always game to try things, and I'm very fortunate in that respect. I do have a deeply spiritual partner. But my story is just to say that I have personally experienced the truth of this idea to just love what you love without pretension. You can be passionate about what you're into, but just kind of stay in your own lane with your spirituality, and it'll kind of just, if you can just stay true to that, it is amazing how much contentment you'll feel, the lack of stress and judgment about what your partner is doing, that can appear. It's like suddenly I just don't really care. I love my partner, and I'm happy doing my own thing, and it's fine. It's just not something we share, and that's okay. But over time, like that, it's amazing what kind of ways in which that can bring people together to share that spirituality too, and you wouldn't even imagine it. Number two is share what you love when it makes sense, but without agenda. this is important because sometimes there's this sense of like, well, there's a line drawn in the sand. My partner, not interested, not spiritual. I'm spiritual. So you compartmentalize it. And I think it's about loving what you love, just openly, freely, without pretension or judgment, or trying to convert. And then on the other hand, it's also if and when your partner is like, why do you like that? What is that about? What is this or that about? Share openly and share what you love when it makes sense to do so without any agenda about what happens as a result. When I see like someone, uh, you know, really interested in something, and I'm like, oh, that looks interesting. And I go up to them and I say, what is that? And they immediately try to sell me on what they're doing. I'm not interested. When I see someone doing something that I'm interested in, and I go up to them and I ask them about it, and they express their passion and why they like it with no, expectation about what I do about it, usually that sells me. You know what I mean? Like usually I'm like, that sounds really cool. I want to try it too. So when there are openings, when a spouse or a partner is saying, what are you doing? Why do you like that? What does it mean to you? And you share it just openly and without agenda, that's really important. It's important to be discerning about those moments and to not hold back from sharing when those moments arrive. Number three, let your spiritual practice enhance and inform your love for your partner and trust time and space. This is the encapsulation of everything I'm saying, I guess. Um, if you keep focusing on the development and enhancement of your own spiritual life and your values, getting closer to the divine, listening for that small, quiet voice, whether it's through chanting or prayer or quiet or meditation, there's so many different ways to become intimate with source. At least that's the way that I'm certainly, that's the mentality that I take. So if you're just, if in whatever way you do, if you are constantly watering the plant of your spiritual life, your spiritual life will be giving you insights all the time about how to love wiser, how to love more deeply, how to become more intimate with those that you love without condition or expectation, without, spiritual life teaches us how to be, not that we can be perfectly unconditionally loving or that we even should be, right? But in human terms, that maybe that's not really possible. It's high ideal, right? But it can push us more gently, like just nudging us along toward being more unconditionally loving, and to focus a little bit more on what it feels like to uh, love more deeply and more thoughtfully the person that we love. It's such a twist to think, how do I serve? How do I love? How do I deepen what I can give? And if we have a partner that is, a good partner, and I think a lot of people who have partners who they're married to or they're in a relationship with who maybe aren't spiritual, that there's a reason that you're there. It's probably because there's something about their heart and soul that's very good. A lot of people, that's the case. Just because they're not into spirituality doesn't mean that there's not something so lovable there. So, it's like feed that love and think about, how can I become more invested in the love of this person? Because that is your spiritual practice too. It's not separate. And oftentimes when we step up our game around how we can love, it also naturally invites a partner to reciprocate. Again, I find that many, many times when people think, well, they're closed down to that, and it's like, how do I solve that problem? If you reverse it and you think, how can I love this person more deeply and fully, without necessarily having to force spirituality on the issue, that is a spiritual path. And it often changes things for the better in a relationship, regardless of whether a person starts, professing Zen Buddhism or something. So, my last piece of advice is to let your spirituality transform the way that you love, and let it intensify the love you have for your partner, if it's possible, and trust time and space. And that if we're always thinking, how can I love more? It also, it's a fundamental switch of perspective that brings more happiness than thinking, how can that person do a better job of being something for me? Now, I know that for some people, that's not going to work because things are bad. And there's a big difference between being with someone where it's like there's not an interest versus I'm with someone who the spiritual incompatibility is so fundamental that it's hurtful, right? Or that asking me to love more or give more or sacrifice more at this point would be harmful to myself. We all have to know where that line is. It's different in every relationship, and every relationship is that with this question in mind might be dealing with a different level of severity. So if things are really bad, three thoughts or insights for if things are really bad. And by that, I mean the spiritual incompatibility is to the point where there are major value conflicts of, really big divides, right? Or there's active oppression or hostility, abuse or neglect, or, it's real, if it's really tough, right? In my opinion, whether it's with your spouse or partner or just with yourself, and you have to be discerning about that too, but you have to be open and honest about what's happening, how it's making you feel, and being open and honest with the fact that you don't want to live with you don't want to live in such a condition. It's really important to be open and honest, and sort of identify the problem. Number two is to seek help, whether it's a therapist or a trusted friend, or it's hard to do it on your own. So being open and honest about what's happening and where you'd like to see things go, and what, like I don't like that you rip on the fact that I'm spiritual, or that you actively oppose, or like condemn or shame me for being into astrology, or this kind of stuff. Whatever the case might be open and honest, and then seek help. Like a lot of the times people think, well, there's no way that I can get myself out of this or disentangle myself. It would be more painful and hurtful, so I'll stay in it. And sometimes that's about, not asking for help. And maybe asking for help starts in prayer or meditation, but it can extend into counseling and friends and family members, people who can have your back and help you take next steps or make important decisions. Sometimes that might even mean, getting out of a relationship. I'm not one to say when that moment is, but it could be. And number three, know that the first priority in spiritual life is the health of your soul. So anybody that you're with, in my opinion, should recognize that self-care, self-health, and the cultivation of our interior well-being, whatever paradigm you're coming from, should be at the forefront of all of our lives. Not into some narcissistic new age extreme, right? But just, we should be taking care of ourselves, and that should be the first priority. And any partner, whether they're religious or spiritual or not, should give you the space to do that. And should say, whatever is helping you to feel healthy and whole, as long as you're not neglecting, things, or being really self-indulgent or something, then I think you should be given that space. If you're not being given that space, I personally would see that as a violation of an oath or a contract between two souls. And to me, that would be grounds for leaving. If, for example, my wife ever made fun of me praying every day, or meditating, or taking care of my body, or like if she started demeaning, degrading, shaming anything around my daily spiritual health, I would be like, that's a deal breaker for me. So it could get to that point where there is some, there's some need to say that's too much. It's so, and everybody, you kind of have to know where that line is, and know that you are never, you never need to justify ever for anyone prioritizing the health of your soul. And to me, if a partner can't respect that, that might be a deal breaker. So that's kind of the way I think about it. And that's really serious stuff. And I know some people, a lot of people that listen to this might be coming from a space of just very simply being like, I love my partner, but they're just not spiritual. What do I do about that? To extreme situations where people are like, astrology is of the devil, and you either stop doing that, or you're going to hell or something, or people actively shaming or oppressing, or being like, you can't leave the house to go do something spiritual, or whatever. I've seen all levels of like discordancy, some that are really mild, and like you just learn to live with it, and hopefully some of these pieces of advice are helpful. And then more extreme versions, in which case I think you got to be honest. Don't be afraid to look for some help, and know that your first priority for all souls is always like, how is that relationship between you and the higher self, God, source, you got to be right there, and that has to be the first priority. And if anything is threatening that, it's to me, there's always a right to leave or take care of yourself. So those are my very, my thoughts. I'm not an expert on any of this. This comes mostly from my own experiences, what my teachers have said, and 12 years of doing professional astrology counseling and, talking and listening to all sorts of people in all sorts of life situations, and kind of the insights I've gathered over time. So I hope you find this interesting. If you have any questions you'd like to see for the next episode, or a future episode, email info@nightlightastrology.com, put Bhakti Q&A in the subject line. I hope that this was helpful and that you are able to trust the process of why you're with who you're with, forever, for whatever amount of time you may be with someone. And my prayer for everyone listening to this is that if any of these struggles are a part of your life, that you may find that there are easy bridges to walk across, compromises to be made, depth and spirit to be shared, and intimacy to be grown. And I hope that happens for all of you who might be struggling with any of this. All right, that's what I've got for today. I hope you guys are having a good week. Hare Krishna, everyone.